One thing I've learned over time is that ignoring your past traumatic experiences and running from the feelings gets you nowhere. Acknowledging your inner child and revisiting your past, as hard as it is a necessary step in loving yourself and living your best, happiest life. Self love coach turned business mindset coach Asia Hilario is joining us on the show today to help teach you how to heal from your past traumas and unlock your future potential. If you're ready to step into the woman you were always meant to be, let's get started. Hey there, I'm Rhea Reeves, and over a decade ago, I turned my life around through budgeting. I went from being an overspender deep in credit card debt to being the founder and full-time money coach of City Girl Savings. Now, I help women work towards their dream life and tap into their financial power one budget at a time. I fully believe you can live a life you love with a budget, and I'm living proof. The weekly City Girl Savings podcast focuses on the intersection of money and the City Girl lifestyle. Join me every week along with some special guests as I share my experiences, advice, and guidance on navigating life and money as an experience-loving millennial. Asia is a business mindset coach who specializes in self-sabotage, imposter syndrome, self-doubt, growing self-belief, and changing the relationship with your inner critic. Asia and I met on Instagram a couple of years ago. My brother actually referred me to her page, and I've been following ever since. Totally love her content. Asia grew up in poverty, but launched her business in 2020, making six figures less than 2 years later. Asia has been featured in Yahoo Finance and has helped numerous women level up their life and business through self-love, energetics, and more. I am so excited to talk with Asia today. Asia, thank you so much for coming on the show. I feel like I barely scratched the surface of your background. So can we start by you sharing just a little bit more about your story and what ultimately led you to becoming a business mindset coach?
Hi. Well, first and foremost, thank you so much for having me on your podcast. I swear, anytime I get an introduction, it just gives me the same feeling as it was like I've been an entrepreneur for 4 years now, and it never gets old, like hearing my intro.
Oh, well, it's a
So,
good one.
yeah, thank you so much. So, oh my goodness, how did I get here? So, I come from a lot of childhood trauma, and I'm sure we'll dig into this today. And I hit rock bottom. And then I started to work on myself and heal myself. And I was like, oh my goodness, everybody needs these tools. Like, I need to share my story of healing because I started to apply the tools and tips and knowledge to my life. And then I saw my life dramatically change. And so I was like, the world needs to listen to my story because I completely did a 180, and we'll probably talk about this. And so I created a blog talking about my story of healing. And I was very, very vulnerable because when I was reading self-help books, when I would read that the author was going through the same exact like feelings as me, I was like, oh my gosh, this is so healing for me. So I started a blog. And then I think it was 7 months later, I won Woman of the Year.
Wow.
For that blog. I know, in 2019 is so crazy. And then I got messages from people and specifically women, and they were asking for help. And I got just so many emails and DMs, and I would answer them in DMs, but there's only so much you can do via DMs, right? And so I shared this with a friend, and she was like, you should be a life coach. And I was like, I don't even know what that is. I've never heard of a life coach before. So I was like, okay, let's do it. I read the description of a life coach, and I was like, oh my gosh, people do this for a living? Like, you can help people like in this format for a living, right? So I pursued that. I ended up leaving my job after 16 weeks, which is insane to say. And then, as you said, I hit my first six figures 14 months after that. And then I launched a podcast that immediately was the top ranking podcast. And it was just so crazy to me. So I just was like, okay, let me keep sharing my story. So I became a self-love coach. And then through my self-love program, I had worked with like 250 women in my career, and a lot of them were birthing businesses through my program. And mind you, they'll come in without even wanting or knowing a business that they want to start. But when you start to love yourself and believe in yourself, your dreams actually become more real. Like you actually believe that you can bring it into fruition. And so they birthed businesses and they're like, hey, can you help me out? Can you like business coach me? And I was like, okay, I've never done business coaching, but I mean, I've done it for 3 years. So let me just do it. So I figured out that I really loved business coaching. It really lit me up. And so within that year, I had onboarded more business clients than self-love clients.
Wow.
Yeah. And then I started to get asked to speak for different organizations specifically for business. And I was like, I guess I'm a business coach. So then I just pivoted fully this past summer. And despite pivoting to a business coach, I brought all my self-love, wisdom, and teachings and approaches to business. And so that's how I'm here.
Oh my gosh. So that's such an inspiring story. One thing that stuck out to me that I want to just talk a little bit more about is you mentioning your rock bottom. I know for me, I hit my financial rock bottom way before City Girl Savings was even a thought in my mind. I was terrible with money and it was like hitting me in the face. And I always say that everyone's rock bottom will look different. So we can't judge anyone's rock bottom. But can you talk a little bit more about like what your rock bottom was and the immediate next step you did to move in the direction that ultimately led you to where you are today?
What a fantastic question. Rock bottom for me. So I always say that my hand of cards that life had dealt me, it was a really crappy hand of cards. Like I came from poverty. My parents moved us to America when I was 14. My dad was a pizza boy in high school, so he's delivering pizzas to everyone. We didn't have a car. My mom took the bus everywhere. So I came from poverty. On top of that, I had severe childhood trauma, trigger warning abuse. And so an adult survivor of severe abuse has low self-esteem, has low self-worth, really doubts themselves. And even not severe childhood trauma, there's other different traumas, right, that we overlook sometimes, and we'll get into it later. So I had that in my hand of cards, and then I had low self-esteem, low worth, imposter syndrome. I also came to America as an immigrant, and I went to a predominantly white school, and I had a really thick accent. You can't tell now because I got rid of it when I was younger, when I first got here. And so I had all of that. And then naturally into adulthood, things got worse. I had like one-sided friendships. I don't like to say the word toxic, but very unhealthy relationship, friendship. I would give up on things really, really easily. And it's so funny to just look back because before I became an entrepreneur, I had multiple like odd jobs where, you know, those like samples that are passed out at Costco.
Yeah.
I used to do that at like the local grocery store for like a side hustle.
Wow.
Yeah. And I didn't own a car till I was 27, like my own car. And I had bought that car from my ex-boyfriend because he was getting rid of it. And it was held up by zip ties. So it was like, I came from absolutely nothing. And so that's why I love what I do, because my whole thing is like, if I can get past the low self-worth, imposter syndrome, poverty, all these things, if we change our mindset, we can really bring this into fruition. Like I was making minimum wage. My parents were on food stamps. I was on free lunch. And so when it comes to rock bottom and self-healing, I had a lot of anxiety, and I also have CPTSD and also depression. And I've healed a lot of those holistically, the symptoms. And it got to a point where I was tired of being tired. And so then I went to therapy, and then that's when I started to blog.
Wow. Thank you for sharing that. I know obviously you talk about this a lot in the work you do, but it's not always easy to admit everything that we've experienced, especially if it wasn't pleasant. So I appreciate you so much for being vulnerable and pulling the thread through on that. You did mention inner child healing and some of the work you did there. Can you talk about the importance of inner child healing and how that helps people to work through their past traumas?
I love talking about inner child healing. What I've found within myself and how I really was in the fast lane, well, it could appear as the fast lane in business, like an overnight success, but we don't see what's behind the curtain. When you start a business, I'm sure you know, your inner child wounds are just amplified. Like it just holds up a mirror, right? They say like you don't face your trauma or like your inner child wounds as much as when you have kids and then when you start a business and also when you're in a romantic relationship, and it also can come into friendship. So what I've noticed was it's not the things that we have to do as an entrepreneur or a business owner. It's a much deeper wound. So for example, fear of being seen. Like I see this in my clients when they try to post content. They're like, oh, I don't know what to post and all these things. But it's like, do you not know what to post? Or do you have a fear of being judged or a fear of being seen? Or say if you want to show up as your authentic self online, the fear of abandonment, as in like if you show up online and people unfollow you, that triggers your abandonment. And you can have abandonment from childhood, from either a parent leaving you or just not being there. I have abandonment trauma and both my parents were present. It's just there were certain ways that I felt abandoned. And so there's abandonment and then also imposter syndrome. There's so many different branches of imposter syndrome, but that programming was created in childhood. So like if you don't feel good enough, that can stem from not feeling good enough as a child, or if your worth was tied to achievement. Like me, I'm half Filipino, and it's very common in the Filipino and Asian culture, especially my parents are immigrants, to get straight A's. And if you don't get straight A's, then you get punished. So what that creates is my worth and my parents loving me is tied to how I produce and how I achieve. Because God forbid I got an A minus, right? My parents would be like, why not an A? And so that programmed my mind to believe that if I'm not producing, then I'm unlovable just by the reaction of my parents, right? And it can be very, very subtle, little sneaky things like that. And so my approach to business coaching is CBT. Have you heard of CBT?
I have not.
Oh, okay. So it's cognitive behavioral therapy. So I have a lot of CBT based activities and it gets down to the core belief. And the most common ones is I'm not worthy. Like either I'm not worthy of success, I'm not worthy in general, I'm not good enough. Every time I show up as my authentic self, I get rejected. So like all those little things, we get down to the root. And if you don't get down to the root, then you're just going to keep repeating the patterns over and over and over again. And you see this, I don't know if you have gotten this in the past or currently, is like before you post something, maybe in your beginning of your content creation journey, or even this podcast, right? My inner critic was like, nobody's going to listen. You're not important. And so pushing past that and knowing where that stems from, because I was made to believe that I wasn't important in childhood. So that gets sprinkled in my business and what I'm doing and what I'm not doing.
You mentioned that the childhood trauma can come out in specific scenarios, like a relationship, starting a business, having kids. But I also wonder if you think that it can trickle into any area of life, right? Because we may be at the grocery store and someone just pushes right past us. And then we have this fear of, okay, nobody sees me. And at what point can somebody recognize that that is a deeper insecurity other than just you feeling like, oh, somebody just pushed right past you?
I would say the reaction to it.
Okay.
So if someone accidentally like bumped into you, it's like the stories you tell yourself. So for example, if someone unfollows you on Instagram, what is the story you're saying? Is it the story of, okay, like I'm not their cup of tea and that's fine? Or, oh my gosh, I'm too much of this, or I'm too much of that, or I'm not worthy for their follow, right? It's the stories that we tell ourselves after something happens that I like to say creates suffering, because as a human, where pain is part of the human experience. As we know, no one is exempt from pain, but there's pain and then there's suffering. So suffering is optional. Pain happens in the human experience. And the difference in that is the stories. So like, for example, say if I slapped you, pardon.
Please
If I
don't.
slapped you, yeah. So if I slapped you, you can have the story of like, ouch, this hurts. I got slapped. Like, this hurts, right? There's like pain. That's pain. Suffering is I deserve to get slapped all the time. Everybody in my life is going to slap me. I don't deserve to be not slapped. Those stories create suffering, right? So it's like really paying attention to the stories you tell yourself. And if we tell ourselves the same story over and over again, you really start to believe it, right?
Absolutely. And I think an important part of this too is self-awareness and recognizing your own thoughts. And I think until a person can get to that point where they actually recognize that they are suffering or they're creating stories of suffering, they won't know to fix it. So I think it really starts with that awareness. And I'm curious, have you heard of Brooke Castillo's life coach school? I love that. I started listening to that podcast quite a few years ago. And the whole concept of your circumstances create your thoughts create your feelings create your actions, and your actions create your results just totally changed the game for me. And I think self-awareness is just so important.
That's a form of CBT, getting to the, yeah. So I actually love that model. That's like the most popular model in just coaching in general. I love it. And that's a form of CBT because you get to the root, because your beliefs create your actions and it's the whole pattern, right?
Yeah.
And so she made it based off that.
Wow.
That's why I love CBT. Yeah.
Okay. So it is all connected.
Yes. And also I would like to mention, and this might be like a gut punch. I just love dropping gems, but hard pill to swallow. A lot of us actually subconsciously like suffering.
Oh, why do you think that is?
Because say if we grew up in chaos, right? If we grew up in a chaotic environment, if things are peaceful, that's unfamiliar. Chaos is comforting because it's familiar. It's what we grew up in. And then at the same time with suffering, if you've been suffering your whole life and you don't know what not suffering is, that's the unknown. And what our brain was created to do is fear the unknown. So we actually rather be stuck in our familiar suffering than get better because it's unfamiliar.
Oh, ouch.
Yeah. Our brain is not nice.
No. And it's just trying to keep us safe, right? Because the unknown could be a danger to us. So our brain is saying, nah, let's stay where it's safe, even though this is not fun. But we can break through that.
Yeah. I had to really rewire everything that I had learned in my programming to even be able to accept success. Yeah. Right? We fear success. We fear the unknown. We fear what we've never had before, even if it's like a healthy relationship.
I totally agree. I think for me, I grew up with two parents who they just promoted like independence and they had respect for me and I could always do what I wanted, granted that it was ethical. And I feel like that got me through life in a sort of naive way. Like I felt like I could have anything that I worked hard for. And when I started becoming more self-aware, I realized that I had a fear of failure. And it was more so like, if I do this or if I try to do this and it doesn't work, I'm a failure. And what does that mean? And working through that has been interesting, but I faced it. Like I said, okay, let's say my business fails. What does that really mean? Well, it means that I go back to corporate. Okay, well, if I go back to corporate, am I still alive? Am I still able to have my same lifestyle? What does that really mean? And I just continued to pull the thread through. And that helped me realize that a fear of failure, I get to define what success is for me. So as long as I always see myself as a success, I'm not a failure. I've achieved the things that I've set out to, and there's more to achieve, but I've already deemed myself not a failure. So it's almost like I went through that fear. And I'm sure as I get to different levels, it will come back up or something may come back up. But I think facing it and doing that inner work and kind of looking back has made a big difference for me.
Huge. Thank you so much for sharing that. And it just shows you too, even if you had supportive parents, like as the daughter of immigrants, we have a one-way track to success. And that's becoming a doctor or a nurse or an engineer. That's just one way to success. And you had really supportive parents in terms of what you wanted to pursue, but you still had that fear of like failure and success. And I also blame the school system, right? Because it doesn't match real life when you're in the real world. For example, you take a test, you're not allowed to collaborate, you're not allowed to open book, you're only supposed to memorize. But then in real life, you get multiple chances and you actually are encouraged to network and collaborate. And you can try over and over again. Whereas in standardized testing is like you have one time. And if you fail that, then you're a failure.
Oof.
Yeah. And the biggest thing with failure is redefining what failure means to me and also the story. So I have this group coaching cohort for business owners, and we actually have a station, like a group chat, and it's called Fruitful Failures. So if you tried something, you chime in on there and you explain what you learned so that we can redefine what failure actually means.
Wow.
Because I saw this TikTok where this parent, I just love watching parent TikToks for when I have kids, but I think it was like a dad that every night when they had dinner, he would ask like, what were your failures today? Wow. And imagine redefining that as a kid, like, oh, I failed today. This is how I failed versus like, I failed today. I'm not worthy. I'm a failure. I'm just not good at things. Right. And so like what that programmed in his kids, it's a luxury in itself to have that. But they weren't afraid to talk about their failures and they changed their stories to their failures as kids.
Wow.
Right?
I need to watch more TikTok.
Probably not. I've spent so much time on TikTok. But I love parent TikTok.
I love that you shared that. And it's such a good reminder for us and those listening that you can also change the narrative for your kids. You can do things completely different if you have that awareness to ask that type of question. I think that's really awesome.
I used to get scolded and punished for making mistakes as a child. And as children, we make mistakes all the time. So like if I knocked something over, it was always met with like, oh my gosh, like I have so many things to do. Why would you knock that over? And in my last relationship, he had a daughter and we're still really cool. And he's a very conscious parent. So when she would knock something over, he would be like, whoopsie, you made a mistake. Like, let's go clean it up. So anytime she made a mistake, she would be like, whoopsie, okay. And so when she grows up, when she makes mistakes, she's not going to be like, oh my gosh, I'm such a bad person. I'm a failure. She's just going to be brave and courageous in making mistakes. And I think that's the biggest trait to have also as an entrepreneur is not being afraid to make mistakes.
Right.
Because the successful entrepreneurs actually make the most mistakes because they have the courage to get back up and dust themselves off.
Absolutely. I mean, I can't think of the quote, but it's something along the lines of you actually should welcome failure because you're going to learn and then do something different and be better.
It's called failing forward. You fail, but then you reflect on what you could do and you use those lessons as a stepping stone forward.
Yes. Yes.
Are you loving this episode so far? Well, the money and life level up conversations never end in the City Girl Savings community. Visit citygirlsavings.com for instant access to resources that help you budget, level up your money mindset, and so much more. And make sure you stay up to date with CGS by following us on Instagram, TikTok, and YouTube, all at City Girl Savings.
So shifting gears a little bit, I want to talk about a different type of trauma, and that being grief. the death of a parent is a traumatic event and grief is its own beast. For me personally, my dad died over 10 years ago. And I remember 6 years after he died, my grief came out in so many unexpected ways. I would be like so snappy with my partner, whom I lived with, I still live with, but I would just take things out on him. I couldn't be happy for wins that happened to him. I couldn't be happy for wins that happened to me. And I remember this vividly. He used to like fishing. He still likes it, but there was this little lake around our house and we were fishing and I was sulking and miserable and like for no reason that was apparent. And he told me that I should probably talk to someone. And it stung a little bit, but he was so right. And I got myself in grief counseling. I saw a grief therapist and it totally changed the game for me. And had I not done something, I feel like I would have self-sabotaged myself and this great relationship that I have. So I'm curious, do you have any experiences with self-sabotage and how can people recognize that behavior in themselves? Because I didn't. Somebody had to tell me. And then I sat and thought about it and realized, oh my God, he's right.
You know what? Everyone self-sabotages because it's the fear and it's the way that our brain is set up. And thank you so much for sharing that. Grief is a whole beast. Like grief is a forever thing. It's not something that goes away or shrinks. You just learn to grow around your grief. So thank you so much for sharing that. I would say the biggest thing, I'm actually coming out with a self-sabotage course.
Wow.
Yeah. I know this is going to be published in February, but I'm looking to launch it either at the end of January, the beginning of February. So if you're listening to this, you can go to my page. I saw that question. I was like, oh my gosh, I'm literally creating a self-sabotage course. But the first thing is everyone does it. So like create a story that like, it's just my brain. I like to say it's my brain braining. There's nothing wrong. I'm like, thank you, brain. I'm safe. You can leave now. But notice how you do it, the how. So it's the when and the how. So a lot of people self-sabotage in many different ways, like overthinking, procrastination is the biggest form of self-sabotage. So noticing how you do it, kind of taking audit, right? You can grab a journal and taking audit of when you do it, how you do it, because you'll start to notice patterns. And then getting to the root, there's a bunch of roots within childhood trauma, right? Because it's really where it stems from. Everything was created. Is it the I'm not worthy of success? If you're sabotaging in a relationship, do you have a core belief of I'm not worthy of relationships, a healthy relationship? For me, since I come from, like I said, severe childhood abuse, my biggest wound that I just chip away at, it's not going to go away. I just chip away at, and it liberates me more and more as I chip away at that. I have a coach myself. A lot of things poke at my worthiness wound. So in my business, am I worthy of success? Am I worthy of being listened to in my podcast? Am I worthy of being seen? So yeah, so how, when, and like getting to the root and being gentle with yourself, right? Like the stories, for example, I always like do this where if I self-sabotage and I told my best friend, oh my goodness, I totally procrastinated on this huge presentation. And she says in reply, oh my gosh, what's wrong with you? Are you kidding? Like, how many times are you going to do this? Like, you're a joke, right? Because we say that to ourselves. But if it's from someone else, we would be hurt. We would be distraught. We would be like, what? Why are they saying that to me? But we're so used to saying that to ourselves. So self-compassion is key in healing anything. Because like, imagine if you procrastinated and then like the big presentation comes along and you're like, okay, we self-sabotage here. Maybe next time when you see these signs, then we can do this, this, and this, right? We have a plan. We do this, this, and this. Versus like, oh my gosh, here we go. See, that's why you're not worthy of success because all you do is procrastinate. Like, when are you going to get over it? So self-compassion, that's the biggest thing that I always get questions because I feel like I'm I was going to say not to toot my own horn, but I think as women, we should toot our own horns.
Totally. Totally. Toot away.
Society keeps us small. So I'm like, I'm going to toot my horn, and I inspire others to toot their own horn. But I'm one of the most disciplined women I know across the board. And it used to never be like this. But people always ask me, like, how do I show up to the gym every day? How do I do this? And it's self-compassion.
Yeah.
It's not that I'm consistent in the gym 365, 24/7. It's when I am tired and my body is telling me to rest. It's the story I tell myself that actually gets me in the gym the next day. I'm not talking like crap to myself, because then I'm not going to go. And our inner voice, that inner critic, most oftentimes mirrors our caregivers. So if you had really critical, overly critical parents, just notice who your inner critic sounds like.
Wow. I'm like trying to think for myself, like, oh my God, that's so interesting. And I feel like unless you work with a coach like yourself, or you're in therapy, or you read things that can help you have that self-awareness, you don't think about those things, but they play a role in your everyday life. It's crazy.
Yeah, I just want to do a quick example. So with my ex who has a daughter, I told her not to jump off the chair. And of course, kids are just going to do their own thing. And she jumped off the chair. And I was like, see, the first thing I said was, see, I told you, like, if you jump off the chair, you're going to get hurt. And she was crying. And my ex pulled me aside and he was like, Asia, compassion first and then lecture. So he would say compassion first. And then I realized in that moment, when I fell out of a tree, because I'm an island girl, when I fell out of a tree or just did something, I wanted, like, as a child, when I would fall out of a tree or just did a mistake and I would be hurting and in pain or like sad, my parents would be like, see, what did I tell you about blah, blah, blah? But in reality, I needed comfort. So when I made a mistake into adulthood, I would omit the compassion and I would be like, see, you saw the red flags. That's what you get for like not reading the red flags, blah, blah, blah. And so that moment, I was like, anytime I make a mistake or something, I'm like, compassion first. So I like talk to myself like, it's okay. And I'm just like hold space for myself. And see, with that moment, right, where he like called me out gently, where I was like, oh my gosh, I didn't even realize I was repeating a cycle from my childhood.
Crazy. And I just want to talk about that really quick, because I think an important part of all of this awareness that comes to us is not to blame our parents or our caretakers and not to hate them for how they treated us, but to have compassion also for them, because at least now we have this self-awareness enough to know, okay, I need to do things differently, but they likely didn't. And that's why they were behaving the way they behaved.
Yeah. When we try to forgive others, really, it's really hard, because in reality, we need to forgive ourselves first.
Yeah.
And that was the biggest part of my healing journey, is seeing my parents as also traumatized children who didn't get the luxury of healing, because it is a luxury. If you really think about phones, if we need an answer, we can Google it. Whereas our parents had to go to the library to get answers. They literally had to physically go to the library and get answers. And I'm like, what? If the fact that I can just Google how many grams of protein is in almond milk or something on my hand, like, I'm not going to walk to the library. And then my parents had multiple jobs growing up. So to prioritize healing is a luxury that a lot of our parents didn't have, because they were in survival mode. So just forgiving them and not holding that anger and resentment, and just knowing you can have both, right? You can like hold them accountable and forgive them. And at the same time, like, know that that wasn't okay. Like forgiving them. I think the biggest thing in forgiveness is it doesn't excuse what they did. It's just knowing like that it wasn't about you.
Yeah.
Like they didn't traumatize you because you're a bad person. Is because they were traumatized themselves.
Oh my gosh, that's so deep. But I appreciate you for saying that, because it's such an important thing for people to realize.
Yeah, definitely. It's lighter when you forgive others also.
So shifting gears a little bit, The entire mission behind City Girl Savings is that you can live a life you love on a budget. And a budget is not something that restricts, but something that uplifts. So, obviously, you grew up in poverty and your situation has changed in more recent years. But can you share what your early experiences were with money and budgeting? And how have they changed over time, specifically when your income levels change so drastically?
Oh my goodness. I'm still actively healing my money trauma coming from poverty. It's just so funny. I was laughing earlier because it's raining in LA and it never rains. And I walked to my gym because it's next door. And I saw this quote where it was like, growing up poor is funny because I have to convince myself to buy an umbrella. And so I had to buy an umbrella. And I was really thinking about it, like looking around. And mind you, I make well over six figures. So it's like, just buy the umbrella, right? But I'm just aware that coming from a poverty mindset, switching to an abundant mindset versus like scarcity has really, really helped me in my business and just in life, right? Because when we're operating from scarcity, that's just the energy of the mindset of there's not enough to go around. And that's why also people hoard.
Right.
People hoard things because it's a reflection of like, say their great grandparents or their grandparents in war. If they were in a war, they actually had to hoard their resources because they didn't know if they would have enough or it would run out. Pardon your question. I forgot your question.
Oh, no, that's okay. So it was, what were your early experiences with money and budgeting, and how did those experiences change over time, especially when your income changed?
Yeah, I would say I had to grow my discernment in me operating from a scarcity mindset or me actually like saving. So like, for example, these are just daughter of immigrant problems. I always talk to my best friend about this. Just like a paper towel. If I'm like wiping down stuff in the kitchen because I just come from nothing. So I want to make sure every crevice of that one piece of paper towel is used so that I don't waste another thing, right? And that can actually work against me because as a business owner, you actually have to invest in your business for it to grow. So I would say discerning scarcity mindset versus saving, and then also recognizing what beliefs I inherited from my parents. So like, for example, my dad, we used to drive past these really big houses and my dad would say, oh yeah, they have a lot of money, but I bet they don't have time with their loved ones.
Wow.
So what that created in my subconscious is I can't have a lot of money because I have to trade in time with my loved ones.
Wow.
So what I recognized in my business that I was plateauing at like a 10K month every month. And I was like, like, I wonder what that is. And I dug into it with my coach and it was like, I didn't want to make more because I thought I had to trade in time with my loved ones and my joy. So I had to rewire and retrain my brain to believe that it's safe to welcome abundance and to grow my business. Because a lot of us internally, it doesn't feel safe.
Wow. I mean, just hearing that example you gave about your dad and what he said, driving by big houses, did your parents ever talk to you about money or making money, saving money, spending money? Did they ever talk to you about that? And if so, like, what were some of the things they shared?
Oh man, none of it served me. They're both immigrants. So like moving to America, credit is only a thing in America, which I didn't realize. But my mom said, like, don't ever open a credit card because it's the devil. Like, just don't. Yeah. And my dad, money doesn't grow on trees, all these things, right? And then like money's the root of all evil. But I had to rewire my belief to know that money just amplifies whatever's within you. So like the greedy billionaires, right? Money didn't create the greed. It just amplified it. So for me as a philanthropist, for me to get more money, that means the world becomes a better place.
Right.
And you have to rewire that because it just changes the relationship with money and like the shame around money. I think that as a daughter of immigrants, we have a lot of shame. I have a really nice apartment in LA that I had to rewire and just make me not feel bad and shameful because my parents still are struggling with their like bills. But at the same time, my environment helps my business grow. And so it took me a lot to even like sign a lease to a nice place when my parents are struggling. And so there's just a lot of shame that I've just been working on specifically for the past like 2 years because it affects my business and it affects my relationships and everything. So
can I ask, and you don't have to answer, but can I ask, do your parents contribute to that? Or is that something that's internal and you're creating that? Shame?
Internal, 1000%. They never come over and are like, oh my gosh, like you can use this to help us with groceries. They never shame me at all. It's just like the internal voice.
Yeah. Well, I'm sending you all of the good, abundant vibes to help you work through that because you are a sweetheart and you deserve everything that you have and more.
Thank you. I receive all of that.
Good, good. So shifting gears once again, you posted something on Instagram and it made me stop scrolling and like really soak in what you were saying. It was a very vulnerable post about a breakup that you had. And I would love to hear like what pushed you to share that. How did you feel before and after sharing? And do you see yourself doing that again in the future? Should you be in a situation similar to that?
Yeah, it's so funny. That was one of the most saved posts I've ever had.
Yeah, it was impactful.
Thank you. I love being vulnerable. Vulnerability is my superpower. And as humans, we are fearful of that. A lot of it has to do with childhood trauma. And so for me personally, I like hearing people's stories and that's how I heal. Whereas like if someone told me to do something, it doesn't hit me as hard, right? So it's like you wanted to go through a tunnel and you read everywhere that if you go through this tunnel, there's a chance that you might get attacked from a bear. You're like, sometimes it's like, oh, I'll just find out for myself. But if your friend was like, no, I went through this tunnel and I got attacked by a bear, you're most likely to listen. Because it's like, I went through that. Let's not go down that, right? So it actually hits harder.
Yeah.
It makes you pay more attention if it's like storytelling. So I've figured out that storytelling is my superpower. I'm also really funny. I didn't really show it much on this podcast, but I like to put a spin on like childhood trauma and inner child healing with like a humorous spin on it because it can get really dark sometimes. And so yeah, vulnerability is my superpower. And I share vulnerable stuff like on a daily basis. And I don't do it for the messages, but I get so many of like, I needed to hear this today, or like this got me through the day. And there's nothing that feels better than knowing like you helped someone see the light when it was dark. And when I created my blog years ago, my mission, I wrote down my mission for the blog and it was, if I pulled myself out of the darkness, I vow for the rest of my life to help others see the light in their darkness. And that's like my why. That's just like my why for my business. That's my why for my life. Yeah, I think I answered the question.
You did. Basically, you didn't think twice about posting it because like you're just naturally vulnerable and those stories and that message that you have, like it just comes naturally for you to share.
Yes, but it also, I will say it only came naturally when I expanded. It's called window of tolerance at the beginning of my business and entrepreneurial journey and content creating journey. It was really, really hard. I was really fearful because it was like fear of being judged, fear of being seen. That's why it's really important to dig into your inner child wounds, especially when you have a business, because you can actually work through that and it can become more natural. So now I don't even like think before I post, really. I just like let it out, but it wasn't always like that before. And that's why I love mindset coaching because you need mindset to bridge the gap between knowing better and doing better.
Oh, yeah.
Because we know what to do, right? Because we're
Yes.
like, oh my gosh, going to the gym, mental clarity, all these things and health. But it's like, how do you bridge the gap from knowing better and doing better? That's like the trick, right?
Yes.
And it's
Yes.
mindset.
And that's in any area of life, like finances, relationships, business, like any area of life.
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
Exactly.
So I know there is someone listening to this episode who wants to start their own business, but they have a block or a fear of leaving their 9 to 5. What immediate next steps would you give them? What advice would you give them to help them move past that?
I have a framework in my coaching and it's root cause, rewire, and realign. So finding the root cause, finding where that fear stems from, what the true fear is, and then rewiring through like repetition. It's called neuroplasticity, that if you repeat something over and over again, it becomes habitual, kind of like my posting, right? And then realigning is like taking steps towards your goal. And it could be very baby steps. Like everyone glamorizes the quantum leaps or like the really big overnight success, but it's never an overnight success.
No.
So root cause, rewire and realign. And then also knowing that like fear doesn't go anywhere. I still have fear everywhere. And what's that quote where it was like, courage isn't the absence of fear. It's feeling the fear and doing it anyways.
Yeah.
A lot of the times we wait till the fear is gone. But honey, you're going to be waiting forever if you wait till the fear. Anywhere. Yeah, it's kind of like when you wait till you're ready, for example, parenthood. You can read all the books. You can listen to all the podcasts. You can babysit someone. You can talk to someone. You can do all these things, but you're not going to be 100% ready for when you have kids. And my mamas know, and my dads know that like nothing truly prepares you for it. So my advice for anybody just like pursuing a passion project or a business or anything is like, you're never going to feel 100% ready. I have never felt 100% ready for anything, honestly.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I think too, like if you don't get started, if you don't move in the direction, if you don't take that next step, you're not going to know what the next step is to take, or you're not going to know if something does work or it doesn't work. And then you can shift gears. So actually taking the action, even if it isn't perfect, is absolutely necessary.
Yeah. And fear doesn't mean you're going in the wrong direction. Oftentimes it means you're actually going to the right direction, because the things that really light you up and bring you joy and your biggest goals will actually bring you the biggest fear.
Ooh, yeah.
A lot of the times we feel the fear and we're like, oh my gosh, I'm going the wrong way. But it's like, no, actually follow that fear.
Oh, great advice.
Mm-hmm.
Asia, I feel like everything that you have shared today will definitely make an impact. So I appreciate you so much for coming on. Before we wrap, just 2 more questions. What's next for you and your business? I know you have the self-sabotage cohort, so I'd love to hear more about that. And then how and where can listeners connect with you?
Thank you. So I have a self-sabotage course. It's actually not a cohort, it's a course. So it's like self-paced. Mm-hmm. And that's coming out at either the end of January or February. How you can connect with me is asia.hilario on Instagram. And then my podcast, I'm actually relaunching. It's called the Business Baddies Podcast. It should be out by the time this interview is out. And so that's my podcast. And then I'm the most active on Instagram, and I always reply to my DMs. And so I always invite everyone to like DM me. It takes a lot of time, but I love it. I vowed to myself that no matter how like big I get, I will always be the one replying to my DMs, because I just love community. And I know social media can be draining for a lot of people, but I love community. I love connecting. And I started off as a self-love coach, women empowerment specifically. So yeah, come say hi.
Yes.
On the gram.
I will link to all of that in the show notes so people can connect with you. I definitely feel the empowerment energy coming from you. So thank you so much again for being on the show.
Yay. Thank you so much. It was lovely.
Thank you so much for letting me be the money coach in your ear today. I hope you enjoyed this episode of the City Girl Savings Podcast and you feel empowered and motivated to take the next step in the journey to your dream life. Remember, if someone like me, a millennial who loves to travel, new experiences, and iced coffees can live a life they love on a budget, you can too.